Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the latest revelations concerning the renewed lockdown in Leicester after a huge surge in new infections, which reveal that Boris Johnson misled Parliament on Wednesday as to the measures taken before renewing the lockdown. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So to begin with, just so we're clear about why it is that Boris Johnson is deliberately endangering British lives with his random lockdown actions in the past few weeks, the Daily Telegraph gave us a really good indicator. His support base are against the lockdown. That's what it comes down to. Not just now, they always were, and they work hard shifts in trying to convince anyone who will listen to them that it does no good. Now, for example, look at this statement on the front page of the Daily Telegraph from yesterday. Infections tumble after lockdown relaxed, it says. And then, virus cases in England fall 40% in a week as Leicester restrictions are questioned. The implication is clear. They are saying that new infections dropped despite the lockdown being eased. And so the renewed lockdown in Leicester is not doing any good and is only actually doing harm, and it shouldn't be in place. But of course, this is bollocks. I mean, we know from other countries that when you ease the lockdown, the rate of infection goes up. So why do they think it doesn't? New infections, of course, is always a loaded statistic because it can be fiddled. Even Donald Trump understands this. If Donald Trump understands a thing and you don't, you need to be worried. In his own words, he said, if you don't test as much, you won't get as many positive results. So how many are we testing? You know, is it that are we testing fewer than we were? Is that causing fewer positive tests? We don't know because the government haven't published the figures on the number of people tested for over a month. We also know that the government are keeping Pillar 2 new infection data to themselves. This is the vast majority of the infection data that comes from the private companies contracted out to carry out this work. So the new infection data is unreliable. In fact, as a little aside, it's, you know, we weren't scratching our heads too much as to why they would give the contract to do medical testing to an accountancy firm when actually hospitals and NHS trusts would have been much better placed to do that. We just assumed that they were doing it because Conservatives want to put as much public money into private hands as possible. It is also possible that they knew they wouldn't be able to keep data obtained in a hospital private. But for a private company, they just tell them don't release this information to anyone, and they won't. So it is possible that that was another reason. Even then, I still don't see how they got a 40% reduction, even with the official data. I mean, I keep an eye on new cases, the official data for new cases and deaths, and I work out percentage changes. I've never had a 40% reduction. But even if they pulled some dodgy maths to get that figure, that's still not a reason to doubt the renewed lockdown in Leicester, because they're saying that new infections has dropped by 40% across the country, therefore it's madness having a lockdown in Leicester. No amount of dodgy maths is getting the infection rate in Leicester to be 40% lower. It exploded, increasing massively. And that's the point of local measures, or it's supposed to be. You know, you stop looking at the national picture and you apply measures on a regional basis. That way you achieve the best balance between protecting the economy and people's lives. If you've got a region where the rate of infection is very low, you can open up more of the economy. If it's very high, you need to close it a little bit. You don't apply the same measures everywhere. But it's those local measures that were called into question this week because it transpired that the government are not sharing that infection data with local authorities. For example, if the local authority for Leicester had access to the full data, they wouldn't have just seen an increase in infections. It's not just a case of going, oh, the number of infections is a bit high, so we should put a lockdown in place. No, that's not what you do. You want to avoid the lockdown. What you would do as a local authority is you'd use your local knowledge to build up a map of where these spikes are occurring. You'd have the addresses of where the people who are testing positive came from. You'd have the workplaces. If they attend schools, you'd have the schools. You'd be able to see if those new infections had occurred in a school, for example. Now that some data has become available, they've discovered, for example, that quite a lot of the new infections has come from under 19, so maybe a school, as well as workers, people who are now back at work, so maybe a particular workplace as well. Could even be a residential area, but they'd be able to see the hotspots, and they'd be right on it in terms of dealing with the situation before it became as bad as it got, and they could have avoided the lockdown in the first place if the measures they'd have applied worked. But they weren't informed. Instead, the government only acted when they saw the raw figures get completely out of hand. No attempts to find the source of the spike, just point in the general direction of the Midlands and announce a lockdown. But on Wednesday, when Boris Johnson was pressed by Keir Starmer of Labour to explain why the delay, the Prime Minister said that they'd acted very quickly. He said that 4 mobile test units had been sent out shortly after the 8th of June, as well as a range of other measures. He then said that as these hadn't worked to suppress the rate of infections as they had in other areas, he then announced the renewed lockdown. Now, if you squint your eyes a bit and you don't see the hiding of data from a local authority as a dreadful policy, you might just believe that the government had adopted measures and then scaled up those measures rather than just going for the ultimate measure in what could be seen as a reasonable response. No one's suggesting you see a little bit of a spike in infection, go full lockdown again. If you see it start to go up, try and just manage the little area where it is. We sent out mobile testing units. That sounds vaguely reasonable. It just turns out to be a little bit of a fib. I mean, for my money, it's still not good enough, not giving the local authority the data which led to that explosion in new infections. But, it turns out he didn't even apply the measures that he stated in Parliament as people would understand them from what he said. Boris Johnson said he sent 4 mobile testing units to Leicester when he became aware of the flare-up, and they arrived shortly after June the 8th. Now, what actually happened was the first of those 4 new testing units was sent on the 18th. That's 10 days later. Now, I would say 10 days isn't shortly after an emergency situation, but that was just one. He said 4. The next one was on June the 21st, and then there was another one on June the 27th, and then a couple more this week. Now, as he said 4 new mobile testing units had been sent as a response, and it was not until this week that the 4th of them arrived, that means it took 3 weeks for the 4 new mobile testing units to arrive. So Boris Johnson misled Parliament because the impression he clearly would have given, if you're thinking these things were sent out shortly after the 8th, you're thinking to yourself, well, the mobile testing units, surely all they have to do is get onto the A1 and they're there the next day, or maybe a day to fit them out and another day to get there, 2 days maximum, surely. That is what you would call shortly after. No, 3 weeks later. Now, because he didn't give a date as such, he just said shortly afterwards, and that's a bit subjective, it's not an outright lie. But like I said, it's a clear misleading statement because no one's going to imagine shortly after for an emergency it could be 3 weeks later. If you needed an ambulance and one rocked up 3 weeks later, would you classify that as the ambulance having arrived shortly after the initial phone call to 999? No, you wouldn't. And I know some people might roll their eyes and go, okay, Johnson misled Parliament again. But it is serious. That he does it a lot. And sometimes he does outright lie, not just say something that is clearly misleading. Doesn't mean we need to be desensitized to it. We should actually be appalled every time he does it. Because, and this literally is a matter of life and death. There are people in this country who think the government is doing their best on it. They would have listened to his statement in Parliament and thought, well, that sounds reasonable. It wasn't, even if what he said was true. But the fact that it wasn't true means that he is deliberately deceiving people. There are people who think he's doing his best when he's not. It's not just that he's incompetent, he's deliberately not doing the right thing. All so that he can suppress the infection data that allows his supporters to try and say ridiculous things like we eased the lockdown and actually the number of infections has gone down, so it has nothing to do with it, which is an absolute madness. Anyone who's actually looked at reliable data knows that this is nonsense. But anyway, that's it. That's my thoughts on it. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.